Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning. If you're out there on the West Coast or maybe in another part of the world where it's not afternoon, welcome to the webinar. I'm Derek Hannum from ReposiTrak. I'm joined with my good friend and partner, Lauren Kennedy from Upshop, and we're going to, over the next hour, talk a little bit about traceability, our partnership, and get into some questions submitted by all of you in our Ask Us Anything format, which the Upshop team has been doing for a while. We liked it so much here at ReposiTrak, we thought we would team up and do it as we're partners now in traceability. So this is about simplifying supply chain transparency for FSMA 204 and beyond. Again, I'm Derek Hannum. I'm the Chief Customer Officer for ReposiTrak, leading all of our efforts around traceability, food safety, and compliance in the food supply chain. And I'm coming to you today from my home office in Orlando, Florida, and I'm joined by Lauren Kennedy, VP of Customer Success for Upshop. Lauren, welcome. This is exciting.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, very excited to be here and have everybody join us. As Derek said, I'm Lauren Kennedy. I lead our customer success team at Upshop. We are a total store operating system and solution for in-store food retailers. And so today I'm joining you actually from a hotel room. I'm on the road in Rochester, New York, but normally you'd find me in Minnesota. So happy to be here.
Great, awesome, Lauren. We're delighted to be doing this with Upshop, and we'll look forward to doing this more of this Ask Us Anything type format. So let's dig into it, Lauren. Both of our companies have been working on helping our customers solve for FSMA 204 for a while now, and traceability more broadly. So help the audience understand what the challenge is here and the magnitude of this thing.
Yeah, I think, just a little context to bring everybody up to speed on, where did this partnership come from and what journey have we been on alongside our food retail partners, both in retail stores, but all the way up through the supplier. The truth and the magnitude of this mission when it comes to FSMA 204 is not just what is going to be regulated in the data, the magnitude of the data that sits underneath these regulations, but really we're starting to unlock the future of traceability from source to store. And so you'll see here on this slide just some fun facts, but when we look at the data capture that food retailers are up against as we transition to these regulations is the different amounts of critical tracking events that there are, the sheer number of data points that are needed. We're talking billions of records when we look at source to store. And so as we've investigated and worked along and learned about these expectations of retailers and the suppliers go forward, the complexity continued to just grow. So the sheer volume of information, but the complexity of things that both our suppliers, our DCs, and our stores were going to solve required more eyes. And so if you want to flip ahead to the next slide, sure. I think I can highlight a few of these issues and potential solutions. So what we started to hear as we worked with different food retail partners, and Derek, I know you share the same as you worked with those similar food retail partners, but additionally up in the supply chain and all the way up to our supplier network, is there are many things that need to be solved, both from the supplier data and the accountability to what is needed, and how do we make sure we have one way of getting that data for food retailers or simplifying that process, but all the way into the store and how we're going to get that data in and available to a store, a food retail store, if they were both needing to act on a recall, but additionally provide that data to any sort of audit or follow-up that they may be having in the store. And so we saw things from the reliability around ASNs, the time-consuming nature of scanning and what's really going to happen at the DC, data fields missing from suppliers, a whole host of things that you're seeing here on this slide, but not sure if there's anything else you would add as you guys have partnered with different retailers as well as suppliers across the board.
Yeah, I think that's just the nature of the complexity, right? And how great the complexity is. We don't, we use the term supply chain a lot. It's not a chain, it's a network, and it's a big messy network of a lot of companies. We call it a many-to-many environment, right? Lots of suppliers, each with a bunch of customers. Each of their customers has a lot of suppliers, and there isn't much that's standard or uniform across how those companies communicate with one another, share data, and in some cases it's really, really bad in terms of the ability to share data, which FSMA 204 actually requires. You have to have a supply chain where data can flow very easily between the trading partners. And for ReposiTrak, we live in that, we like to say, we live in that space between suppliers and retailers, or suppliers, wholesalers and retailers, where we're making those data connections on a regular basis or helping companies share documentation on a regular basis. So we had a pretty good idea of how messy it was going to be. I think it's just always surprising to people when they start to dig into it. I think retailers are often surprised by the inability of their suppliers to do things that they want them to do or need them to do, and vice versa. I think suppliers are often surprised and caught off guard by the requirements of retailers. There's actually a few questions I think that we're going to address today that I think are emblematic of that disconnect that exists between suppliers and retailers and their capabilities. They go beyond their willingness to work together, right? Is how can they work together, and how we can use systems to actually make that easier, automated, and keep the workload light and reasonable. So yeah, lots of work to do, and we've always said, traceability will look like an ecosystem for most companies, and I think the partnership between ReposiTrak and Upshop is an important part of that ecosystem.
Yeah, so well said on the ecosystem, and we've talked about it in many different analogies, the relay race, but this really becomes a data strategy that it's engaged by different processes and technologies to make it come to life. And so we were frequently running into each other with different retailers, and so this really made a lot of sense, and we're very excited about joining forces together to really help our food retailers and really the food industry as a whole revolutionize what does the future of food safety and traceability look like, all the way from that source to store. And so excited to, I know we formally announced it almost a month ago now, but really this is kind of the landing spot of why we ended up together.
Yeah, and I think that, as we have more and more conversations with retailers, and we've had a bunch already since we announced this at NRF, this partnership, it's starting to become clear to people how we'll work together, but there still are a lot of questions about, well, what does Upshop do specifically, and what does ReposiTrak do specifically, and how do they work together, and is one of you buying the other? And the answer to that is no. This is a data collaboration, right? We're taking the best of what we believe is, we're the largest, fastest growing supply chain traceability network, 4,000 to 5,000 suppliers already in the network. We have 30,000 supplier connections across our compliance network. So ReposiTrak has that big existing footprint and relationship with the suppliers that essentially comprise the US food chain. But what we didn't have and don't do and don't plan to do is all of that important store execution and optimizing store processes like task management, freshness management, ordering and forecasting that Upshop is so good at it. So hopefully people can start to see that this is truly a almost purely synergistic relationship between the two companies, where it's a 1 + 1 = 3, and it's all comes down to how we share the data, that quick and easy handshake as data moves, gets collected and products move through the supply chain. So Lauren, I know you're as excited about it as I am.
Yeah, I find the winner in all of this is our retail partners. The reality is a supplier could service over 200 different banners or retail groups. And if everybody chooses to solve this a different way, that model flips, and our food retailers will be impacted by that, right? The cost will have to come down somewhere, as they have to, from a technology standpoint, support that in a different way. And so really, as we look in that partnership together, creating a unified ecosystem for that supply chain management from a data standpoint really unlocks that. So I know we're going to flip into, what does this actually mean? Where do we play? How do we come together? Where do we hand the baton? So I'll let you start.
And then we'll finish the commercial and take some questions, right? So, but this is, look, we think this is important to detail for anybody who might be either using one or the other platform today or considering using us both together. It's just, what's this look like? And it really does, Lauren used we don't say farm to fork. What we've been talking about is supplier to source, right? So, or I'm sorry, source to store. So source being the supplier. And that's where ReposiTrak relationships start, and traceability is with product suppliers. Now, we can be the upstream solution for a supplier with their suppliers. So we can help with the ingredients, or with distributors and brokers, we can be upstream of you before products come into your facilities and then move down to your customers. But our main area of concentration right now is dealing with the many thousands of product suppliers across all food categories, and not just the food traceability list categories, for products that are coming into retailer or wholesaler distribution centers and then onto stores, or the direct store delivery of part of our food supply chain. So again, if you think about this diagram, it's a little busy when you first look at it, but at the top are really the item movement. So this is what the supply chain looks like in a highly simplistic model, what the supply chain looks like for food coming into retail stores, or restaurants for that matter, right? And then the bottom is more the record keeping or the data tracking. And so if you just follow the top along, products start at suppliers. Again, it's ingredients and other things start upstream of that. It's not excluded, but just to simplify things. And then those products move into distribution centers in many cases for a retailer, or it might be a wholesaler or another distributor, somebody in the middle, right, who then ships it off to a store or a commissary. And then those products eventually make their way into the stores. And whether they come through the commissary or they're just finished products, or produce coming into stores, seafood coming into stores, those stores, they could be transformed in the stores, or they just go right onto the shelf, right? So there are critical tracking events that require key data element records created at every step of the way here. A lot of it is, in our world, is shipping and receiving, but one of the best parts of working with Upshop is Upshop has that commissary solution to really help if you're running central kitchens or commissary operations where you need that additional record keeping associated with FSMA 204, the transformation critical tracking event. Upshop can help solve that problem, and then the data flows can sync up to ReposiTrak. So at the bottom, and you can just kind of see how we fit in and how the solutions would work. So ReposiTrak is commonly the solution that retailers use to do all of the supplier onboarding for uniform, easy data collection from the suppliers. And again, tracking those shipments into DCs, out of DCs, and then again, there's a handshake or a handoff that takes place usually with Upshop as we move into commissaries and stores, right, Lauren? And that's really where the Upshop solution and the benefits of the Upshop solution can be realized at retail.
Yeah, and when we get into the retail operations, really that's obviously where our bread and butter comes into play. And so how do we take the actions that are needed not only to collect the data, but to ensure there's compliance within, whether that be the commissary or in the store, that's followed through. And then circling back to passing the baton back from a data standpoint to ReposiTrak, really this allows retailers, and when we start to look at this model, is when it comes to an operating lens to this, is how do they focus on the value they can get from an operations beyond just staying compliant, and then allow you all who are best in class in this to really take the onus on with the suppliers and the accountability there, versus also having the retailer have to chase the supplier. So
great. So hopefully that's helpful, right? And helping people understand how it all fits together. But this is the summary, right, Lauren? This is what we hope to deliver.
Yeah, it is exciting. I think, we hit on it a couple of times, but we're excited not only to bring this to the next level from what is the future of traceability, how do we continue to protect the brand and trust that you have with all of your consumers as food retailers, but then where is there additional benefit? This isn't just something we have to solve for, but there's opportunity that sits in many different of these operating streams as we look at that source to store.
Great. So now let's get to the meaty part of this, which is the questions that were delivered. So again, we saw this format that was being used by the Upshop team, Ask Us Anything, and we just thought it was really cool because we've been doing a lot of webinars. We actually did one yesterday for suppliers and had more than 550 registrations for that, and 270 people showed up live. So it was an active webinar, but we're trying to bring education and information and solutions to your suppliers as well. So if you're a retailer on this webinar today, as many of you are, we're working with your suppliers to help them deal with your requirements, whether or not you work with ReposiTrak or Upshop directly, because we want to help the industry get to full traceability as quickly as possible. But let's dig into the questions. As I'm getting ready to transition the questions, I realized I glossed over a few things in the beginning of the webinar, so let me circle back on those. This is recorded and everybody gets a copy of it afterwards, right? So we're going to send you, and anybody who registered, because obviously not everybody can always show up for a webinar that they registered for, all registrants will get a recording of the webinar, so you'll have it later. You can share it with colleagues or review it if you like. There is an opportunity for you to submit live questions. So at the end, we're going to take whatever questions have been submitted as we go through these questions. And also, we've broken these questions into categories or subcategories. And if something comes up as we're answering a question within the category, we're going to pause at the end of the category and and see if any other questions have come up related to that category before we move to the next one. So get your fingers on the keyboard. If something pops into your head and you want to ask a question, submit that in the question pane that's in the little control panel for the webinar. And hopefully you see that. It's not the chat pane. It should say questions, right? And you can just submit them in there like you would a chat. And then our team will pick them up and we'll talk about them as we go. And then the final point is right at the end, before we take more live questions, we're going to pop up a quick poll. Oftentimes people are in our webinars, and look, we don't use these webinars as like a lead generation tool or anything like that. We're not going to stick the sales teams on you because you were good enough to spend some time with us on a webinar. But if you do find that you would want to talk to one or both of our companies following the webinar, we're going to give you an opportunity to just tell us that in a poll question, and we'll follow up with you. So it'll just be, a friendly call to say, how can we help? So you can just tell us, yeah, I'd like to have a conversation with one or both of the companies, and we'll reach out to you after the webinar and do that. Okay. So now we're going to jump into the questions. I think the first group is for me, and so I'm going to dive in and we'll talk about. So we're getting this question a lot, and it's probably on the minds of more than a few people here on the webinar today. And I got to look on my other screen, so I'm sorry if I'm looking away from the camera. But so under the new administration, we've got a new administration. I don't know if anybody noticed. We have a new administration. We have a new presidential administration. They're making some changes. What's the impact on timeliness and clauses of FSMA 204? So the quick and easy answer is nobody knows the answer to that. But let me share some perspectives right now. In ReposiTrak's view, FSMA traceability is no longer just a FSMA 204 issue, and in fact, you could make the case it's no longer a regulatory issue at all. Why do I say that? Because large retailers have moved and are moving beyond the food traceability list and the deadlines and data sets required by the FDA, and leaving those in the past, right? And we see this behavior some of the large leading chains, and I think we might have some folks on the webinar today from some of those companies who have said, for whatever their own reasons and their own strategies, we're going to do traceability across all food. We're going to use it as an enabler in our supply chain. We're going to collect more data than is required by FSMA 204, and we're going to have deadlines that accelerate the whole thing. And we don't work with those companies that have made those decisions, so let's be clear about that. But I think any objective outsider would look at that and say their behavior is not being driven by the FDA and FSMA 204. They're making business decisions based on the value of traceability for their businesses. And in that way, we believe other companies will follow their lead, and traceability will just continue to expand and become a reality. So our advice to anyone who's in the wait and see mode right now, thinking that the Trump administration may or may not make a change to the FDA, maybe the enforcement deadline gets pushed down the road. Traceability is an industry issue now. It's in the industry. It's a competitive issue. It's an industry issue. It's an opportunity in many cases. See it as that. Stop worrying about the FDA and the FDA's deadline. The other thing that's important to point out, the rule is in effect today. So a lot of people get confused between the enforcement deadline being January of 2026 and the rule being in effect. The rule's in effect today. So what's that mean? You're not compliant with the rule. You're not compliant with federal food safety laws as they exist today. So imagine a scenario, an unlikely or perhaps an unfortunate scenario somewhere down the road where your company gets involved in a class action suit related to foodborne illness for foods that were sold in your or handled by your company. Right, and one of your executives is being deposed, or maybe even on the witness stand, and the counsel for the plaintiffs asks, certainly you must have been in compliance with all federal food safety laws at the time of the incident. Your company wouldn't be able to answer yes, and no others would either, because nobody's in full compliance with FSMA 204 today. So you really do need to get moving on the basics of traceability, but you also need to keep an eye on the fact that traceability now is really becoming full traceability is becoming an industry trend, and we believe will accelerate as we move into the future. So that's just our view on it. Lauren, I don't know if you want to add or maybe you want to rebut anything that I just said, but please do.
No, I think the only thing I would add, just as we've gotten closer to the space, is regardless of administration, and I think you nailed it on the future of traceability, we're at all-time highs for recalls. And so the responsibility that we've seen that our food retailers are taking is truly leading the way, and this is just a component of that.
Yeah, I think I'll try to put a bow on it, and I'll just say this. We have a saying here that's been a bit of a guiding principle for us, or a North Star, and that is, if traceability were free and easy, everybody would already be doing it because it's inherently good. Traceability is inherently good. It's good for consumers, it's good for retailers, it creates a more efficient supply chain, and it creates a safer and more transparent supply chain, and that's inherently good. So the challenge then for all of the member companies of the food supply chain and solution providers like our companies is, how do we figure out how to get to as close to free and easy as we can, right? And that's what really drives us and frankly energizes us every day to get up and say, how do we make this thing easier, less expensive, less complex, and try to bring full traceability to the supply chain, because it's just the right thing to do. Okay, any other questions we've got our colleagues actually fielding the inbound questions. I think Mason, maybe you're fielding the inbound questions. Anything else related to that you think that fits into that category, or shall we move on?
We have nothing right now, but if any questions pop up, I can absolutely, present those at the end.
Yeah, we'll circle back on anything. So don't feel like you missed the boat if something pops into your head about, a category that we moved past. Okay, so the next question is, who holds more responsibility, the supplier for informing the retailer that their product is on the food traceability list, or the retailer for tracking high-risk items and key data elements? Okay, so I'm not the FDA, but again, I'm going to share our perspective on this, and I think it aligns with both the letter and spirit of FSMA 204, and that is that there's a record-keeping requirement for every party who, again, process packs manufacturers, or holds a product on the food traceability list. If you hold a product on the food traceability list as a retailer, you don't do anything else, but you hold the products, you have a record keeping requirement. The distinction about whose job it is to determine if a product is on the food traceability list, I don't think will be on the FDA's mind in the course of an investigation. They're going to expect you to have the records that are up to date, accurate, and reflect the food traceability list, right? So as a retailer, and again, your own legal counsels should advise you around this, the obligation under the rule is with you to make sure that your record keeping is thorough, complete, and accurate. And that means you're going to have to work with your suppliers to figure out which products and companies sell those products on the food traceability list. Now, does it require a degree of collaboration between the trading partners? Of course. How do you do this without supplier cooperation? But to be clear, the legal risk lies with every individual company for the records that they are required to create and hold. So Lauren, you want to add anything on that one? Or
good on that one?
Okay, Mason, anything else on that one? Hopefully that clears things up. Again, this is one of the biggest challenges. I'll just add one little bit of editorial here. One of the biggest challenges for any retailer or wholesaler, for that matter, getting started, if they have hundreds or in most cases thousands of suppliers, is who's in my traceability program. And so I'll share a minute of our experience so far working with a good number of retailers and wholesalers on this part of traceability, in particular, onboarding the suppliers. Who are the suppliers? If you're not ready to trace all food yet, think about going beyond the FTL list and doing all seafood, because it's practically all seafood anyway. You may want to look at going broader in produce, or maybe all produce. Some of this will be driven by operational complexity, right? Is it easy to segregate and sort products? If you've got a mixed produce load, how are you going to figure out what to trace and what not to trace? Who the heck knows the difference between a soft cheese and a hard cheese? The practical application of this comes down to operationally how you execute. It's not so much the data management, it's when a human being has to get involved and they have to use judgment. Those are scary things because humans can't do judgment very well consistently, at least not like computers can. So you have to consider all of that. So you may find that you're going outside the lines, which is perfectly fine on your traceability program. And then we just give people advice like, look, if you have a suspicion that a supplier makes or sells a product that has a nut butter in it, put them in your traceability program. Like, just make them do your traceability program. And if they push back, just say, we're instituting traceability in our way to our requirements. We're not limited by the food traceability list, and nobody is, by the way, limited by the food traceability list. So that's one of the areas we actually can help retailers. So if you do want to reach out to us and just talk about, if you haven't started on that piece yet, identifying the suppliers, my goodness, get started on that piece. It can be time consuming, but we can help you with that. Okay, tech solutions for compliance. This one is really wide open, so I'm going to try to be brief, but I don't know how well I'll do, Lauren, so you might have to shut me up.
I thought you were going to say the last slide that we already showed.
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah. What type, that might be the right answer, right? What type of solution is best suited? I think it depends on where you are in the supply chain, and it kind of does harken back to what we just walked through with this partnership, is where are you in the supply chain and what are your needs? We like to explain ReposiTrak as a toolkit, right? It's functionality, it's a toolkit. I think it's fair to say Upshop's similar, right? Number of different solutions, there's a suite, you don't have to buy everything. You just use pieces of it that make sense for your business, and you deploy them in the way that creates a functionality or a capability that you don't have today. The one thing you do need for sure is a repository. You need an archive for all your data records. The systems that you use today probably aren't architected for that. So I talk to people from time to time, and they'll say, my ERP, I've got the history in the ERP, and I always say, great, can you get to it, pull it out, buy lot code when you want it, within 24 hours, export it to Excel and ship it off to the FDA, because that's the requirement. And if you can't do that, then your ERP might not be all you need. You might need something else. This approach with ReposiTrak and Upshop is, I think it's fair, Lauren, is we're not really telling people rip your systems out, by the roots and replace them with our solutions. In general, our solutions work with your existing solutions and kind of sit on top of it. So ReposiTrak does act as a type of data archive where you can store all the records and retrieve them very easily. And that's why it's important that this, Upshop relationship exists, because in some cases, Upshop will be the data capture mechanism, and data will need to come back to ReposiTrak. And sometimes we'll push the data into Upshop when we need to, when it makes sense. So there isn't an easy answer to what kind of tech solution you need. It's all about what your current capabilities are. So start with mapping your current capabilities, create your supply chain map, understand how traceability impacts it, understand your CTEs, and then figure out where your gaps are, and that'll drive your evaluation of solutions. All good, Lauren, on that one?
I like it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Mason, anything else related to that looks like it's close or in that category?
We just had a general question, and it was do brokers need to comply with this new rule?
Yeah, I answered a bunch of broker questions yesterday, didn't I, Mason? Brokers have a lot of questions. So brokers are interesting because let's define what broker means, right? So I think in this context, we'll define broker as an intermediary who is seen by the retailer as the supplier, but doesn't actually control the product or touch the product or maybe even own it, right? And so they're an intermediary. In many cases, they can be like a purchasing arm for acting on behalf of a retailer or whatever. So I'm going to try to be strict to the traceability rule and understand that there probably are exceptions. Again, the rule applies to persons who, I'm quoting from the rule, persons who process, pack, manufacture, or hold products on the food traceability list. Process, pack, manufacture, or hold. If you're a broker and you don't do any of those four things, right, you don't have an obligation under FSMA 204 for record keeping. Having said that, if your customer retailer needs all their suppliers to do traceability and share traceability data with them, share key data elements, your customer may look at you as a supplier and say, you're doing traceability, I need your log codes and log code sources, and you got to share data with me, and maybe I need an ASN from you or something like that. So you just got to be prepared for that. You can't do that today. You're going to need to do it in the future because your customer, the retailer, sees you as the supplier. That doesn't mean the FDA is going to come to you and ask for records. That just means you have to have a way to share data with your customers. And it looks like traceability data sharing for FSMA 204. So if you're a broker and you want to talk more about that, when we launch the poll, click yes, I want to talk. We'll send you an email. We'll set up a time to talk, and we'll just talk it through. Or you'll have our contact information on a slide coming up, and you can just contact us directly as well. But I know it's challenging. Brokers have some work to do. I don't think there's any getting around it as a broker. You're not skirting the traceability requirement. For your customers, again, you probably don't have an FDA requirement. Okay. Anything else, Mason, before I go to recall programs and the relationship between FSMA 204 and recall?
That's it for right now.
Okay. So Lauren, I'm definitely going to want you to jump in on this one. Let me just share a perspective, and then I want to hear your view of it as well. How does FSMA 204 integrate with the company's recall program? So the traceability rule is really designed, and I've heard this a couple of times directly from FDA representatives, so I feel pretty good imparting this and relaying it. The FSMA 204 is really about the investigation that precedes a recall. What the FDA is trying to accomplish with FSMA, the new traceability rules and the record keeping, is to accelerate the investigation so that the cases of foodborne illness can be contained more quickly, because we get to the source of the contamination and we understand the source of the contamination faster than we can today. Because today's investigations have to go stepwise backwards through the supply chain to understand all the points at which the product touched before it ended up at a retail food establishment and was, involved in an unfortunate case of food contamination, foodborne illness, an outbreak, right? So it's really about the investigation. Having said all that, if you're doing traceability, and particularly if you're doing full traceability across all food, knowing what went where by lot code in your operation, especially as a retailer, should really help your recall process, right? Because if you've got different commodities, particularly in those commodities that tend to be bulk, like produce or maybe even some seafood, but if you've got commodities, particularly in produce, where you might be sourcing from a number of different places for a similar commodity or a like product, you're going to want to know by lot code what went where, because you don't want to actually have to take every single commodity off every store shelf if it isn't really involved in the lots, right, or the suppliers that had the case of foodborne illness. And so what we have the opportunity to do here with traceability data syncing up with recall solutions is to create more precise recalls, less expensive recalls. Look, today when something happens at the commodity level, if it's onions, romaine, you name it, whatever it is, all the product gets pulled off the shelf. Well, all the product isn't contaminated. So as a retailer, you may get reimbursed. You probably do get reimbursed by suppliers for that, so they make you whole, but you've missed the opportunity to sell that to a consumer, and all the food is wasted, right? So it's enormous waste. There's enormous waste in recalls today because they're imprecise. Traceability will create precision in recalls that will reduce a lot of waste and hopefully help to educate consumers that the bad products aren't here anymore, but we still have the good ones that you can buy and satisfy your need. So Lauren, I'm curious about.
Yeah, I know there's a great facts out there around what's happened to categories when these foodborne illnesses or recalls happen, where it's not only are we have the waste, but what happens to the outside category. So where you left off there, I would just highlight the more we can do around recall programs and building that confidence with the consumers, not only is going to help us from the speed and the waste and controlling the foodborne illness, but how do we, and that outbreak, but how do we make sure we're protecting that whole category at the end of the day? We look at a recall from a store lens, right, is how do we help action those items quickly and identify where those are at. So if you think of a food retailer that has over 100 locations, which locations is it in? And then even if you go down to that product, I have a pre-question around multi-suppliers for traceability. Where is those ingredients going if you're doing any sort of production? Is what we want to unlock through the ability to stop it, understand what's coming in at that back door, but then additionally, where is that product or that inventory sitting within your food stores, as well as even which products within the store. So I think you nailed it right on the head around the action or the ability to react, right, and go along with that. So
good deal. Thanks, Lauren. Mm-hmm. Mason, did we get anything that looks similar to that recall or anything related to that, or are we good to move on?
No, you're good to move on. Okay,
so regulatory requirements. What extra steps are needed to comply? Where do we start there, right? So look, this is a lot of people when we've been at it now, we're more than 2 years into our work in earnest in traceability with customers. And most of the time our conversations with those customers, our initial conversations were with food safety leaders, food safety and quality assurance leaders, FSQA professionals, But it does soon become apparent to these companies that this is not really a food safety activity. It's a food safety objective, but this is data management, right? It's supply chain data management, it's data capture, it's records management, and that's really all of the steps to comply have to do with record keeping, right? That's really what compliance is about, is can I create the records, hold the records, do I have the data sets that I need from the parties that I need, and can I get them in the easiest way possible? So compliance really starts about understanding your record keeping requirements, again, mapping your supply chain to understand your critical tracking events. Every retailer receives. If you have a store, you receive, right? If you run a distribution center, you ship and receive. If you run a commissary or you have a central kitchen in one of your stores that ships to your other stores, you transform, right? And so all of those things trigger record keeping requirement, and back up the supply chain. If you're a supplier, and I don't think we have a lot of suppliers on the webinar today, but if you're a supplier and you're involved in, harvest or, packing or cooling or any of those earlier phases of production of the products, you've got critical tracking events that have specific record keeping requirements. So really starts that fundamentally FSMA 204 compliance starts there. What's my record keeping requirement under the rule? And then you have to assess, how do we get there? And I'm not sure who submitted that question, but it's really broad. So I'd love to have more conversation with whomever submitted that question. If you want to reach out to us directly, because I'm worried I didn't answer the question that you really asked, because the question was posed so broadly. But Lauren, any thoughts on this one?
No, I think maybe let's flip into the next ones. I know we got to host more, and then I'm sure there's more popping into our questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Any that we missed, or?
I think we're good. I think this one's going to be in your wheelhouse, Lauren.
Yeah, and Derek, obviously, I know you'll add in here. I think the first one is probably could be asked bi-directional, whether that be from an Upshop lens, an Upshop retailer, or a ReposiTrak partner today. The basic and easiest answer, or the starting answer, is no. Nobody is obligated to connect together. We do view this partnership as an accelerator, and when Derek said the 1 + 1 = 3 is the value that we want to bring together, and solving this for all of food retail, not just from the lens of one retail partner. So we will be flexible with you all, and we can talk to you each individually in follow-up or other conversations you might be having on what makes sense. But there is a lot of benefit to be gained. And hopefully we're able to display that a little bit today. So I'm going to move into the next. Anything you'd add there, Derek? I apologize.
No, all good. No, I have nothing to add. Nothing at all.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to start with a multi-supplier traceability. So as I go into these next three, there's going to be overlap, as I saw these three come in as a pre-question. A little bit of overlap, but I want to make sure I articulate two differences as we look at the operations in a retail store. So first and foremost is we have on operating solutions that fit what we would consider a commissary. A commissary, in the most generic terms, can fit in two places. It's a supplier, so it'd be followed by a shipping event. But then we do also know that some of our retailers make for other stores. So they may be producing within a store and shipping to another store. And so by the information that sits in the FSMA today, it says what being able to carry that information if a shipping event is followed. I want to just start there. So when we look at multi-supplier traceability and how do we handle it for ingredients for multiple suppliers, I'm going to hit it from two lenses. One is at the back door in receiving. So our receiving is agnostic to supplier and can hit all types of suppliers in the back door. And we build this off of both parameters and trust factors that you have. And so by being able to ingest the information, whether that be an ASN or another form of intake at the back door, our ability to know that there are critical items or data elements that we're going to need from that supplier, we already have notifications that we can set off for that backdoor receiver. You may choose and have a significant amount of trust with that supplier and not need to engage at a detailed level. And that can be a choice you can make, or from a trust factor, you may choose, just as we said, put all items on a Traceability Act. The same can happen at the back door. really the engagement at the back door when you're looking at multiple ingredients is that we know from any distribution center, you could have different lot codes for the different, you could have 2 different lot codes that are sitting in for 2 different, let's say, use the head of lettuce that we used at the beginning. You may have 3 different lot codes that are coming in on that shipment. And so making sure that you received those 3 and that made it into your back door is going to be important as you're going to want to follow that through. Then from a production standpoint, as you're distributing ingredients in a produced environment, is really this is going to be handled both by technology, but also you're going to want to consider some process as well. Because you may have, back to that example of lettuce, if you're making salads or maybe even a sandwich and you have multiple lot codes in your back door, really as you're making those goods and you're producing a new lot code, if it's in a commissary situation or a multi-unit situation before you're selling to the consumer, is which ingredients, which lot codes are going into which sandwiches. And so the way we have it set up from a technology standpoint is an ability to scan the ingredient lot code that's going in when you're producing that item. But we will need to make some considerations around organization and process so that that's being executed if we're going to be able to manage that perpetual inventory across. Derek, anything you would add there or anything, other considerations?
All I would add is that, you know, all of that works great with Upshop, particularly when the suppliers are onboarded to a consistent way to share the data, right? And so, you know, the upstream piece of this is where it all starts. So this is why we're so excited about the partnership, Lauren, because the functionality and the power of the Upshop platform is so great to help stores deal with this situation, particularly if they have, you know, commissaries and transformation going on in their own facilities. So it's great. This is one of those areas where we just didn't have the expertise and wouldn't have had it, you know, in decades to be where Upshop is with it. So it's very cool.
All right, I'm gonna go to the next one. Or sorry, I'm gonna hit the next commissary question.
Yeah,
so how do we handle commissary? So I hit on the receiving components, which still is applicable in a commissary situation. The only thing I want to add from a commissary standpoint that I haven't hit on yet is the ability we have to create a new lot code and an ASN or that shipping, that purchase order, or sorry, the invoice that's going to go to the retailer that's receiving it or the store that might be receiving it. So the ability to take together all that data, the different lot codes from the different pieces of ingredients, create a new lot code, and then be able to ship that information to the landing store. Because really in a commissary, you become a distribution center. So if we go back to the 3 buckets, and even if you're shipping store to store, you've created a distribution center within a store. And so you have the supplier information, how do we receive that in? Then you have the transformation. And as a distributor of that product, you're going to need to take that information in the new lot code and be able to have the receiving store or receiver of that product be able to ingest that. And then the last piece is processed and repackaged foods. I've kind of hit on these before, but again, the call out is the ability not only to ingest and manage the data, but print out that new barcode that's going to be on the product and sent to the next store. Mason, anything I might have missed, or any other questions or
no, none specific for this.
Okay.
Specific. Okay, so we'll go on now. We've got a few more, and then we're going to go open it up for the questions that have been submitted so far on the webinar. So retailer date requirements, best before for Walmart or pack date for Albertsons, and how to align the retailers. So this is aligning for suppliers to align the data sharing across various retailer requirements will become a more and more difficult challenge. And it's, I think, one of the reasons why we had, 550 people on a supplier webinar yesterday. Suppliers are starting to get their traceability requests now from a number of retailers, and they're coming in a number of ways. And some of them say use ReposiTrak, and others say send us an ASN via EDI as an 856. But the variations in the data sets are different, and they will continue to be different. So while FSMA 204 has a standard set of key data elements, what we're seeing now is retailers going beyond that. And even using ReposiTrak, we go beyond the basic, key data elements to include things like the UPC, and date codes will become even more critically important. So this is part of the challenge for suppliers is every customer has a different data set. How do I comply with their data set? How do I make sure that I'm in continual compliance to the degree that retailers can try to stay within the bounds of something that looks reasonably standard? Helps suppliers, but the fact of the matter is it'll never be standard beyond the food traceability, that's KDEs and anything else that might emerge as a standard, like in the next question I'll address the PTI, the label, or the G10, the GS1128 label. But it's just going to be challenging, right? So as a supplier, you're going to need to be very well informed about your retailer requirements, and you're going to have a mechanism in place, either a system, a process, or something to be able to share the data in the way they want it, when they want it, with the data sets that they're asking for. So it's going to get harder, not easier, unfortunately, for suppliers. Anything related to that, date codes or anything like that, Mason?
Nope, not as of right now.
Okay, great. So
I would just add here, if I can add one thing,
yeah, please,
I think as we look at the future of barcodes and the future of receiving, I think it behooves retailers to continue to explore things like camera scanning or even RFID. Those are going to be ways that not only are we going to be able to gather more information, but efficiencies at the back door as well. So something we're staying close to as barcodes and requirements and information and labels continue to change. But it's an exciting time as this is helping. I think this is going to help elevate those discussions as well.
Great, thanks, Lauren.
Yeah.
This question has to do with the traceability lot code source on the label. Must it be on the PTI label? So this is PTI references the Produce Traceability Initiative. I am not an expert on the Produce Traceability Initiative, but I know who the experts are. And so I actually went to the PTI website, and there's a wonderful best practices resource that they keep updated on the PTI website around labeling best practices. To be clear, FSMA 204 doesn't have any rules stipulating lot codes or traceability lot code sources on the label. And I didn't find anything on the PTI best practices document that stipulated that the lot code source would be on the label. There is a lot of, and I'm happy to share the links to the PTI resource that I used. Maybe we can drop a couple of links into the emails that we send out for people, because I've got another link that I want to share around from the GS1 website for the next question. But there is a lot of confusion around the lot code source or lot code source reference in the supply chain generally. A lot of people don't even know what it means, right? And because it is kind of a new terminology. And so we spend a lot of time explaining to people it's the location at which the lot code was assigned, and we spend a lot of time explaining to people you can use your FDA registration number, you can use your street address, you can use a geolocation if it was a field packed produce, you can do a lot of different things, but there is a specific set of options for how you identify the lot code source, and those are all spelled out on the FDA website quite well. And so if anybody has any more questions about that or wants to follow up, let us know. Happy to share, again, the links, the things that I reference. Look, there are things that we're experts at and there are things that we aren't. And we're certainly not labeling experts. We don't work in the space of labeling. Upshop does, and we don't. But we read labels, right? And so, but outside of that, I'll send you to the experts. I'll always refer you to the experts to get the best information. Lauren, any thoughts on this, the PTI label and the lot code source?
I don't, but I know we have our SVP of product. I don't know if Pete, you have anything you'd add here from a labeling standpoint, or if not, we can move on. I think I'm good. We're good. You got it.
Okay, cool. Good. So the next one is, it's another label question, right? So GS1128 barcodes. GS1 is planning to switch to 2D barcodes by 2027, while manufacturers need to change labels again. So I did not know the answer to this, so I researched it. And again, we'll include the link when we send it out to the GS1 web page that details this. But I did, and I was going to read it, but I'll get confused if I try to find it and read it now because I'm sharing my screen. But it basically says from the GS1, it says that GS1 expects 1D barcodes and 2D barcodes to coexist into the future, right? So the 2D barcode initiative right now is primarily focused on point of sale and converting the point of sale systems to accommodate 2D barcodes, the QR codes or the data matrix barcodes for GS1. But there isn't any plan to replace barcoding, particularly at the case label 1D barcodes on the case label. So I went back and reviewed the public requirements of the large retailers that we've been able to see that they've published on websites or made available to suppliers. And everybody right now, it looks like when they are stipulating a standard, it's just GS1 128 standard case label is the standard, and they're all quite detailed about what their case label standards are. So my best advice for any supplier is follow your customer's requirement, because they're your customer, and if you want to keep them happy, you got to meet their requirement. And that really leads us to the second question here: is big retailers are now asking for GS1 128 barcode on case labels. Should everyone comply? Well, at the risk of being a wise guy, if your customer has a requirement, you should comply, right? Because non-compliance will probably result in bad things. We believe that in all seriousness, it goes back to really where we started with the original question around traceability and should we comply and what's it look like and the new administration and all of that. Traceability now is becoming a customer requirement specific activity, right? It's like packaging now. It's like packaging requirements, shipping requirements. It's part of supply chain requirements. Traceability data sharing now via ASNs or any other format like a portal is just going to happen. It's just happening. So as a supplier, your failure to meet the requirements of certain groups of customers or potential customers will disqualify you from being a supplier for those companies. Why would you want to do that, right? Why would you want to limit your business and the potential for your business through non-compliance? That doesn't make any sense to us. I'm a sales guy. My customer says they've got a requirement. I want to do everything I can to meet it so I can continue to be their partner. So yeah, you're going to have to comply if you want to continue to do business with it. They lay out their requirements and the ramifications of those requirements pretty clearly, I think. So yeah, you're going to have to comply. Lauren, anything to add on that one?
I'm good.
Okay.
We did have one question come in.
Go ahead, Mason. Sorry.
No, you're fine. It was on the topic of lot codes. So if you're building new lot codes by combining lots, how would you be able to trace back to the original lot codes?
You want to take that one, Lauren?
Yeah.
I think I'll probably jump in.
Oh, Pete, is that Pete?
Jump in, Pete.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Pete. Jump in. Hi, Pete.
So it actually comes into line with the GS1 128 that's on the screen here. So from a fresh perspective, when we're generating that lot code for new products, we are also complying with the 2027 deadline by the end of this year to be able to have a GS1 barcode with expiration date and whatnot embedded into that barcode. How we actually tie that back is that during the production process, we ask the users to scan the components or their ingredients that they're going to use to make, the salads, the fruit cups, the sandwiches, etc., so that we know that these ingredients went into this batch lot, and we produce these items as part of it, so that when the finished products get labeled, we now can say, okay, well, this sandwich has lot code 1234. Lot code 1234 was produced on this day, and it contained all of these ingredients that had these lot codes. So it's basically a track back from the finished product to the source ingredients.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Pete. That's great explanation. I just always tell people there needs to be an association, a record that it creates the association of the ingredients with the new lot code, right? And so commonly done in the manufacturing world today. I think most manufacturers, at least the large sophisticated ones, have something in place to do that. But in the retail world, and certainly in commissary, it'll be new work for many companies. So thank you, Pete. Thanks for jumping in. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to open up for live questions. I think we want to pop the poll real quick right now. So you're going to see the poll show up on your screen. It's not going to show up on my screen, but it's going to show up on your screen. And so we've opened the poll, and it just take you a minute. And if we could ask everybody, we've still got nearly 70 people on the line here. Take 10 seconds and please answer the poll, because it'll help us understand, who might want to follow up from us, because we're here to help. And we've got about 5 minutes left here to do open questions. Lauren's information is on the screen. My information is on the screen. And so you don't have an excuse for not getting a hold of us if you want to get a hold of us. Those are our email addresses and our phone numbers. So they're on there for a reason. If we can help you, if it's just to answer questions, please reach out to us and we'll help you as much as we can. We want you to get to a good place to make good decisions. Okay, thanks for popping the poll up. Thanks to everybody for doing that. Mason, what other questions have we had? I know there were actually a handful that came in over the last few days. Do we have those? There were some pretty good ones in there.
Yeah, we do. One of the first ones here, let me grab it. Do you work with software like Famous? If yes, how does this work?
Yeah, so I'll take that one, Lauren, because Famous is an ERP used commonly in produce, used widely in the produce, among produce suppliers and distributors. And so the answer is, I'll give you a general answer is, ReposiTrak has to interface and do data sharing with any number of ERPs, warehouse management systems, and we do it fairly routinely. And so if those systems have a way to generate a report or export data, and typically they do, and if they have a way to set up a job that runs so that that report can get sent to a secure FTP site or something like that routinely, and typically they do, we can do interoperability with them. So we can take data from those systems, which is commonly what needs to happen, is those systems need to push the supplier generated data to ReposiTrak so that we can help their downstream customers. So the general answer is yes. We've had dialogue with Famous. I'm hopeful we'll have an interoperability arrangement with them soon enough. But the general answer is we do that. So I mean, on the seafood side of things, for example, we've got agreements already in place with Whole Chain and Trace Register and the seafood systems that are commonly used all the way back to the farms and vessels. And so that's the kind of traceability will look like an ecosystem, right? We talked about it. It'll look like an ecosystem, and that extends back into the supplier's traceability programs. ReposiTrak doesn't have to replace anybody's traceability program. If you have a customer that requires you to use ReposiTrak, all we want is the data that's in your traceability system. We don't need to replace your traceability system.
Perfect, thank you. And I do have another question here. Are template traceability forms available to help us companies create compliant records that include KDEs, for example, a recommended format for auditable documents that FDA would want to see?
Yeah, so that got my wheels turning, because with ReposiTrak, we format the records, and you can export them from ReposiTrak to submit them to the FDA. But I started thinking, I know the FDA sent something out on that. So I went into the FDA website and I found it. So there is, if you go to the FDA FSMA 204 website and you search for templates or sortable spreadsheet templates, you'll find it. We'll send the link to it out when we send the recording out to everybody, but it's on the FDA website. So the FDA actually has created templates for the sortable spreadsheet that you can use as a guide.
Perfect, thank you. Next question here. How are retailers managing traceability for items in the store? So 2 specific examples: when a loose produce item like a cucumber is mixed with additional cucumbers received from the prior day, that's another lot. Also, individually packed, ready-to-eat salads. Traceability can be monitored until it reaches the store, but then on the shelves, do individual items need labeling to show the source location? How are suppliers communicating the right data to the retailers, and how much information are they managing for individual items in the store?
I'll take that one, Lauren.
Yeah, I will. I'll start it and let Pete jump in here. First and foremost, I'm going to start with the bag salads. So back to the regulation as it stands today. So first is it followed by a shipping event? So when you're in a retail store, the moment that we receive it, that is where we at that point need no more labeling or additional new data points to be created. We will have captured that data point as it comes in and be able to then find the product from a perpetual inventory standpoint. Pete, I don't know if you want to handle the ingredient piece or the mixed. I think it was a good cucumber example. I'll pass it over to you on that.
Yes, so that one's interesting, right? Because once it's in your 4 walls and you've recorded the receiving event for that, you're technically done. I guess the only opportunity as to where you further have to track that is if you're going to do maybe like a store-to-store transfer where you're going to transfer cucumbers. And I think at that point, you're really looking at a process change within your store. You can't really pull the product that's on the sales floor. You're looking to have to pull from full cases in the back room where you can actually scan the lot codes to record the shipping event and then the subsequent receiving event at the store that it got transferred to.
Yeah, I think that's the key point, Pete, right? That everybody needs to understand, and there is a fair amount of confusion. So there's no consumer-facing requirement under traceability, right? The traceability stops at receiving at the store unless the product is shipped to another retailer, right? Another retail food establishment. So anything that happens after it's in the store, there isn't any FSMA 204 traceability record keeping required. So we are right at top of the hour, which I think is the end of our webinar time. So I don't know if we had any other questions submitted. Were there any submitted, Mason, during the course of the webinar? If there were, we'll answer them and we'll send those out.
We do.
Also with email. Okay, so we ran out of time. So the next time we do this, we're going to allow for 90 minutes, Lauren. So if you're going to be on the road, just plan. You're going to need 90 minutes to do this webinar, but we'll need more time. But thanks to everybody who joined. We had a good number of people join and stay all the way through, so we appreciate it. Look for emails coming out. Let us know if there's anything we can do to help you get traceability ready. Lauren, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Same. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.